Welcome back, folks, to another Archetype review. I'm Frizz, and today we're going to be covering the Loremaster Archetype from the Advanced Player's Guide. The Loremaster is great for all of the nerds out there who want to know a little bit about everything, which I'm sure is a sizable portion of the people who play a Pathfinder and watch my videos, since both of those are probably getting people who really care a lot about information, so this is probably going to be right up your alley. You get a ton of different feats that improve recall knowledge, or decipher writing, or just a ton of different stuff, and you get a lot of lores, which is not surprising for the Loremaster archetype, but let's just jump right into things, rather than wasting your time by messing around. The Loremaster Dedication is fairly simple. You have to be trained in a skill that can be used to decipher writing to be able to take it, which those skills are Arcana, Occultism, Religion, and Society, by the way. But that's pretty achievable to achieve that prerequisite, because those are going to be the skills that are most often going to be used for recalling knowledge anyway, so it's not that hard to get those, and you can just grab them at first level. It's not that difficult. Once you take this, you now become trained in Loremaster Lore, which is a special lore skill that can only be used to recall knowledge. It becomes an expert once you hit a legendary proficiency in a skill that can be used to decipher writing, but the special thing about Loremaster Lore is that it can be used to recall knowledge on literally everything, which is insane. Normally, lores are very, very specific. It's like warfare lore specifically applies to like building fortifications and how armies, set up and organize and all of that. Where Loremaster lore, you can use this on literally everything. Lores normally are hyper-specific, but they actually reduce the DCs of recalling knowledge on things because they are so hyper-specialized. But Loremaster lore can be used on literally anything while still reducing the DC, which is very, very attractive. While you can't increase the proficiency any other way rather than waiting to 15th level and putting a skill increase, getting something to legendary, it's still going to be nice to be able to recall knowledge on anything. Just ask, hey, can I recall knowledge on that? And the answer is yes. Whether or not you'll get information is entirely up to your GM, though. Also, I should put this out here, that a lot of Loremaster feats actually require that you have the Enigma Muse, since they were originally Bard feats that were specific to the Enigma Muse. But you can take these regardless of whether or not you actually have the Enigma Muse. You just kind of ignore that prerequisite. Also, if you have the Bardic Lore feat, then you get better with it, getting a +1 circumstance bonus on that skill specifically, which means that you'll have 2 different lores that can be rolled on anything. Loremaster's Etude is actually a Bard feat that gives you a focus spell, even though it really sounds like it should be Loremaster specific with that name. It gives you a focus point, and if you already have a focus point, then your focus point pool gets 1 larger. Loremaster's Etude is a free action that you can use once you or an ally rolls a recall knowledge with any skill that happens within 30 feet of you. Once you cast it, the triggering recall knowledge attempt gets rolled twice and takes the better result. It's nice and simple, but as anyone who has seen my other videos knows, rolling twice and taking the better has a huge impact on the outcome of your roll, so this is a fantastic boost to the effectiveness of recall knowledge. Magical Edification is super simple. You've gained some basic occult magic to help you understand and transmit magic to others. You get guidance, message, and sigil as innate occult cantrips. All of these are fantastic cantrips for their own reasons, and if you want to know more about them, then I do have 2 different videos going over all of the different cantrips in the game, so you can go and look at that to get a more detailed analysis of these. Guidance can be used for boosting rolls, message is good for communicating quietly, and sigil is as good as your creativity will allow it to be. Overall, these are some of the best utility cantrips in the game, so there's no complaining here, and you get 3 for just 1 feat. Orthographic Mastery is pretty much just you are a master at figuring out the sounds and makeup of languages, which you're probably already going to be because you can use Loremaster lore to try and recall knowledge on what exactly a particular language is whenever it's written down, but it actually gives Loremaster lore an additional use. Due to your understandings of the basic principles of how languages write, you can use Loremaster lore to now decipher writing instead of whichever skill it would normally require. This is generally going to be super useful because it's like, oh, you find a super complicated arcane treaties or something like that, normally you need Arcana to be able to recall knowledge on that. But if you don't happen to have Arcana and no one in your party happens to have it, you can use Loremaster lore now. You can also use it to try and figure out planar languages, which normally you would need religion for. So basically, you can now try and figure out basically any language under the sun, and it's super versatile, you'll never be caught off guard, and it's just generally pretty useful. However, do keep in mind that this will depend a lot on your campaign and your GM, because in my experience, decipher writing doesn't actually come up all that much. So if decipher writing comes up for you in your games, then this is going to be great, but if it doesn't, then it might be a little bit of a wasted feat, so just keep that in mind. At first glance, Quick Study seems like a pretty useless feat. During your daily preparations, you get temporarily trained in a particular lore skill of your choice. This doesn't seem particularly good since you already have Loremaster lore, which allows for you to recall knowledge. But it's important to remember that Loremaster lore can only be used for recall knowledge. But most lore skills are generally super flexible at what you can use them for. You can normally use them for earning an income, or to perform an action related to that lore. So just because you can recall knowledge on how to sail with Loremaster lore, it doesn't actually make you good at sailing. But having sailing lore does actually make you good at sailing. So if you pick something like a sailing lore at the beginning of the day with Quick Study, then you can actually help out sailing around a ship. Although you do actually have to be a little careful with how you pick the lores for Quick Study, because you have to have interacted somehow with the lore that you're choosing in the previous day, or you have to have picked it before with Quick Study, meaning if you go into a library and binge read a bunch of books on sailing, you can pick sailing lore the next day. And then for any time in the future of your character, you can pick sailing lore again, because you've already studied it. Same way, if you are hanging around a bunch of soldiers and talk to them on how, soldiering works, you can probably pick up warfare lore. So it's super interesting, and it means that during downtime you can say, yeah, I spend a week in a library, I want to pick up all of these lores, so in the future I can grab them if I feel like they are necessary. You can get a bunch of creature types, so you can get like ooze lore, or vampire lore. So if you end up going to somewhere with a lot of oozes, or some place like Usalov that's full of vampires, then you can pick whichever ones you want without having to find the actual situation where you'd be exposed to that lore. So overall, Quick Study is a really interesting feat that allows you to get even more versatility out of lore skills. Assured Knowledge is another feat taken from the Enigma Bard, and it's somewhat simple. Whenever you recall knowledge using any skill, you can decide to just get a result of 10 plus your proficiency modifier rather than actually rolling it, just like as if you had the Assurance feat and decided to use it. Also, if you're an expert in a skill, you meet the prerequisites for the automatic knowledge skill feat for that skill, even though you technically don't have Assurance. This is basically, you take this feat to get Assurance with every skill for recall knowledge. It's that simple. Assurance is generally pretty good, so this is a pretty good feat. Although, do keep in mind that Assurance isn't really that good for recall knowledge specifically on creatures, because those DCs are probably going to be pretty high where you don't actually know if you're going to succeed if you roll a 10 and you don't add any other bonuses. So just keep that in mind. But it is going to be fantastic for recalling knowledge on stuff like, oh, where does that architecture come from? Or, oh, what are the traditions in this particular society? Or where did that, architecture come from? It's incredibly useful for those, but it isn't as good for creatures. Unless those creatures are significantly below your level, in which case go right ahead. Greater Magical Edification, of course, requires Magical Edification, but it is very good. It gives you 3 different spells that you can cast once per day. Comprehend Language, Mind Link, and Secret Page. Comprehend Language is pretty useful for people who don't have a lot of languages, or if you're running into a lot of foreign languages that you don't have much of a chance of learning in the first place. Once you cast it, you can comprehend a particular language whenever it's spoken or written down for the duration. It doesn't help you if it's written down in code, because it'll tell you what language it's written in, but it's still coded, so you don't automatically read code. But it is useful for those situations where you have to be able to talk to someone and no one in the party knows their language. So it is pretty nice. Mind Link is also very simple. You touch someone and then you give them an amount of information that you would normally be able to convey in 10 minutes. It's a pretty niche spell, but it is fun and that's really what you need. Sometimes you just gotta convey a bunch of information, and it actually doesn't require language. You don't have to share a language with someone, it's just the information. So yeah, you can use this to try and calm someone down if normally it would take a lot of explaining for why you're doing what you're doing. You just run up and slap them with pure knowledge. Secret Page is another pretty niche spell, but it is useful for someone who knows a lot of potentially dangerous information that they don't want the public to really know. It allows for you to change one page of text into a different page of text, and you can swap them back and forth using a specific spoken password. You can use this to disguise spells in a scroll or spell book, but otherwise it's mainly used for just hiding written information. So if you are writing a letter to someone and they know the password that you always use for Secret Page, you can hide a meaning under an illusion rather than having to hide it in a code, which, depending on who you're dealing with, it might be a significantly better way to hide things. Also, this spell actually does get heightened to half your level rounded up, just like cantrips normally do, which makes it way harder to detect, because if it didn't get heightened, then, detect magic would actually be able to detect that there was a secret page. So it being heightened is very good. Enigma's knowledge is fantastic for figuring out pretty basic information. It gives you the benefits of the automatic knowledge skill feat for any skill that you have that you can use to recall knowledge, although you can still only use this once a turn like normal automatic knowledge. For those not in the know, automatic knowledge allows you to spend a free action to recall knowledge, though you must use assurance on the check. So basically, you get 10 plus your proficiency modifier rather than actually rolling. So it's just a free once a turn, what's that thing? Since you're going to have a ton of different skills that can likely be used to recall knowledge with, you can pick and choose different lures to try and find some useful information. Like I said earlier, unless you're dealing with lower level enemies, or rather enemies that are below your level, you might not be able to succeed all too often with assurance, but it's worth it to try because you're not going to be critically failing with assurance. That just is not very likely with assurance, just how it works and how the math works. So just try and find out. Or you can say, I'll take the time in combat to try and figure out what this architecture, or how old is this place? Do I know any stories about this? You don't always have to recall knowledge on creatures. It's often maybe a bit more useful to, but you don't have to. The final feat in this archetype is actually another one from the Bard. True Hypercognition allows you to spend one action and then roll 5 different recall knowledges, though you can't use any other special abilities or free actions that trigger off of recall knowledges, like, say, Loremaster's Etude. This is situationally useful. Normally, if you fail or critically fail on a recall knowledge check on a creature, you can't actually attempt to recall knowledge again, since you don't know what that creature is, so there isn't a chance of you rolling again and suddenly remembering what the creature is. But some GMs do change this up a bit and just increase the DC, so it's harder for you to know what it is, but you can still try. So if your GM likes to use that kind of house rule, then True Hypercognition becomes so much better, because now if you roll badly on your first recall knowledge, you don't automatically not have a way to use all of the other ones. Generally, True Hypercognition is not going to shine particularly well whenever you're fighting a single creature, because the recall knowledge DC on a single creature is probably going to be a lot higher. So you're more likely to fail, and then you won't be able to attempt the remaining probably 3+ recall knowledge rolls. But where True Hypercognition really does shine is when you're fighting a bunch of different types of enemies, because then you can recall knowledge on that one, and then that one, and then that one, and then you have a bunch of different information that you can use for whichever you want. Overall, I feel like it should be pretty obvious that I really like the Loremaster archetype, and I feel it works really well at making you a knowledge machine. You'll know a bit about almost everything, and I feel like it fits into its role really, really well in the system. Also, if you do end up taking this, your GM is going to want a system for doing secret rolls easily, because you're going to be making a ton of recall knowledge checks. So they're going to need a way to do it pretty reliably. I recommend just setting up like a spreadsheet or something that randomizes every single time you click. So it randomizes a number between 1 and 20, then adds your modifier, so they can just click to automatically know what you rolled. So it's very nice and simple, and then they can like text you the information that you would have learned. So only you know it rather than the entire party. Also, this is as someone who has GM'd a couple of games, and also someone who's just talked to their GM. GMs often really want to give away the information that they are going to be leaving scattered around the place. And normally players won't find that information, and they're going to learn about it after the fact. Because, quite frankly, a lot of information is simply overlooked by the PCs. So I know a lot of GMs would be excited if there was a player that was like, hey, what is this architecture? Where was this built? How old is this place? Because a lot of the information in backstory simply is not found by players normally. And Loremaster lore is a perfect excuse for GMs and players to get all kinds of information that they would not normally get. So please try. It will never hurt to try and get that information. So yeah, overall, Loremaster is rad as hell. Thanks for watching this video. This has been an interesting one to make. I'm trying to get a little bit more on top of things and change the way I'm scripting things, and hopefully it's better. Hopefully. I hope that you enjoyed it. It has been an interesting one to make. The Loremaster is a really interesting archetype, and I hope that you got an idea for a new character. If you did, let me know down below, and if you didn't, or you just want to let me know any constructive criticism or anything like that, then I'd also like to hear that down below. While you're down there, if you like or comment or subscribe or whatever, then that would feel pretty nice for me, because serotonin is appreciated. And also I'm trying to grow the channel and all that, so yeah, it'd be appreciated. Anyway, until I see you next, live a wonderful life.